Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Today, 4 more members of the far-right extremist group, the Oath Keepers, were convicted of seditious conspiracy for their role in Donald Trump's coup. On January 6, 2021, 3 of the men entered the Capitol building wearing tactical gear, while the 4th headed up a so-called quick reaction force at a Northern Virginia hotel, standing ready to transport a cache of weapons into Washington, D.C. These men joined the leader of the Oath Keepers, Elmer Stewart Rhodes III, and a top deputy, who were both convicted of the same very rare charge last year. Remember, as we've noted on the show, seditious conspiracy refers to conspiring to overthrow or, quote, destroy by force the government of the United States. And obtaining convictions for it can be quite difficult. Also today, a jury delivered a guilty verdict against one of the most memorable insurrectionists, the Arkansas man who infamously put his feet up on then-Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk, left her a crude note, and stole an envelope from her office. 62-year-old Richard Barnett was convicted of 8 federal crimes, including 4 felonies. 2 years on, the Capitol certainly looks a lot different than it did that day. And the 118th Congress is now being run by, well, allies of the ex-president, the man who directed that mob to storm the Capitol. We have noticed an interesting pairing among them, the new Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. This duo has been spending a lot of time together since the very first day of this Congress, when we saw Congresswoman Greene acting as one of McCarthy's lieutenants, mostly unsuccessfully whipping votes. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been trying to rebrand herself after being known as a QAnon supporter who regularly spread conspiracy theories. She has suggested the Parkland school shooting was a false flag, even harassing a teenager who survived the massacre, stalking him on the sidewalk. Greene has made racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim remarks. She spoke at a conference led by that white supremacist, the one that Donald Trump and Kanye had dinner with. She has used violent rhetoric, repeatedly making comments about executing Democratic politicians, including Nancy Pelosi.
She's a traitor to our country. She's guilty of treason. Right. She took an oath to protect American citizens and uphold our laws. And she gives aid and comfort to our enemies who illegally invade our land. That's what treason is. Exactly. And by our law, representatives and senators can be kicked out and no longer serve in our government. And it's a crime punishable by death, is what treason is. Nancy Pelosi is guilty of treason, and we want her out of our government.
It's a crime punishable by death. Nancy Pelosi is guilty of treason. Marjorie Taylor Greene no longer wants to be known as the person who did and said all of that. Rather, as a member in good standing of the new Republican House majority. And guess what? Kevin McCarthy is helping her with that. The New York Times has extensive new reporting about the ironclad bond McCarthy has developed with Greene, an unlikely ally in his battle for political survival. They describe it as a relationship born of political expediency, but fueled by genuine camaraderie. That's sweet. In an interview, McCarthy described what he likes so much about his colleagues, saying, quote, if you're going to be in a fight, you want Marjorie in your foxhole. When she picks a fight, she's going to fight until the fight's over. She reminds me of my friends from high school, that we're going to stick together all the way through. It's interesting, Marjorie Taylor Greene boasted about the fact that had she planned January 6th, they would have been armed and it would have been successful. McCarthy has also told allies that he was impressed the Congresswoman quickly became known by her initials. Quote, she knows what she's doing. You've got AOC and MTG. For her part, MTG has taken on an outside role as a policy advisor to McCarthy. That phrase really left me scratching my head, I got to say. The Times reports adding that McCarthy has little in the way of a fixed ideology of his own, has come to regard the Georgia Congresswoman as a vital proxy for the desires and demands of the right-wing base that increasingly drives his party. Now, according to this reporting, McCarthy decided to form the alliance with Marjorie Taylor Greene after looking at the last 2 Republican speakers, John Boehner and Paul Ryan. McCarthy believes they made a mistake by not reaching out to the far-right members of their caucus. This makes a certain kind of sense, I have to say. If you are Kevin McCarthy and your goal is to survive at least 2 years as Speaker, the recent history does suggest that if you do not at least appease the most radical member of your party, your tenure will be short-lived. And in fact, even if you do appease them, it still might be short-lived. It was true for Boehner and it was true for Ryan. So McCarthy is trying to save himself. He is thrown in with the far right, basically handing them the keys to the whole palace during that week of failed votes for Speaker. And now people like Marjorie Taylor Greene essentially run the House Republican caucus, as the New York Times reporting made clear, as Kevin McCarthy's own on-the-record interview does. That includes people like Paul Gosar, who posted an animated video depicting him killing a fellow member of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Andy Biggs, who helped Donald Trump try to overturn the 2020 election, and Matt Gaetz, who brought a Holocaust denier to the State of the Union address. These are not popular political figures outside of their own deep red districts and echo chambers, sometimes even within them, to be honest. Allowing these folks to take over your party's agenda is risky, could be substantively and politically disastrous. There's a reason why John Boehner and Paul Ryan didn't quite do it. They tried to keep them a little bit in check. It's not an abstract idea, right? We saw what happened when the extreme far right tried to take over in last year's midterm elections. It was a debacle for the Republican Party. It's why McCarthy has such a narrow majority. In fact, we now have some new evidence of just how much damage the Trump-backed MAGA right did. There's a study out of Maricopa County, Arizona, that, of course, the home to the capital of Phoenix, the most important electoral county in that state. It analyzed how many Republican voters did not vote for certain Republican candidates, including Carrie Lake for governor, Blake Masters for Senate, and Mark Fincham for Secretary of State. Now, all three were full MAGA election deniers endorsed by Donald Trump. All three of them lost. The study found Lake lost 5% of voters who otherwise mostly voted Republican. Masters lost more than 6%. Fincham, about 8%. That is an enormous, enormous electoral penalty, a sort of MAGA tax on these candidates. In a closely divided state, it's not a recipe for political success. And of course, this applies in the House, too. Sure, the people in deep red districts like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, Matt Gaetz, they don't have to worry. But there are 18 Republicans representing districts that Joe Biden won in 2020. In fact, that includes George Santos in New York's 3rd district. Good luck on that one. But in all 18 of these districts, associating the totality of the Republican brand with, well, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the one who was calling for treason charges and stalking David Hogg, is probably not going to be a big hit. We're already seeing the actual substantive policy concessions that Kevin McCarthy made to the far right. Among the very first votes this new House majority brought up, 2 anti-abortion messaging votes, just to remind everyone that this is the party that successfully attacked women's bodily autonomy and is looking to criminalize abortion across the country. They've already had to table plans to bring up an extremely harsh border security bill after some moderate members balked at the possibility of outright banning migrants from seeking asylum in the U.S. And now, queued up, and it appears to be part of the deal, is one of the many deals Kevin McCarthy made to get the speakership. It's a bill to come to the floor that would abolish the IRS and income tax and replace it with a 30% national sales tax. That's the conservative Wall Street Journal opinion page saying, please don't do this. And they're right to say that on the politics. Think about that for a second. Republicans take power, they get to control the House, and one of their first big votes is holding a vote on instituting a across-the-board 30% national sales tax on all goods and services. Like, the price you pay would immediately be 30% higher. Broccoli, Big Macs, furniture. A wildly terrible idea. Just a ludicrously terrible politics. But honestly, I'm not sure Kevin McCarthy cares that much. That dude is living day to day right now, politically speaking. He's made it to 3 weeks as Speaker. I mean, there's a lot of people who had the under on that, so I guess that's a success. He's not seemed to have a particularly good long-term strategy, I got to say.